for this talk in the Alternate Curious Minds series. And tonight we have the pleasure of listening to Duncan McNabb, but not only listening to, but hearing about his adventures there in the Okovango Delta and his profound knowledge of the wildlife. Now, I've known Duncan for nigh on 20 years now, and we and our spouses have traveled far and wide together in that time. And incidentally, I can recommend Duncan as a superb traveling companion. If you ever find a moment of silence, it will be filled. But his knowledge of wildlife, photography and videography is absolutely unparalleled in my experience. And also his skill as a composer, a writer, a poet, and a musician. In fact, you could classify him as a true Renaissance man. And what he doesn't know, I will happily supply for him, and I'll even make it up on the hoof if I don't know the answer. Constant walking and awareness of the natural world, which he has in abundance, stems mainly from his growing up as a shepherd's son, mainly in Lanarkshire and Midlothian and Perthshire. And his knowledge of love of Scotland is exceeded only, in my experience, by his addiction to the Okovango Delta. And with good reason, because in 2014, he broke the very sad news to me that made me green with envy, that he was off to the Okovango Delta. And it is a place that I have often wanted to go for about 40 or 50 odd years, because of course it is an unparalleled collection of African wildlife. It is a linchpin in the ecosystems of sub-Saharan Africa and indeed the entire Southern Hemisphere. And it is also, for an ex-archaeologist like myself, absolutely fascinating, because it is, of course, one of those crucibles of many and various species of hominid. So, without further ado, I'll hand you over to Duncan, and I know that you will find his photography a huge amount more interesting and also more skillful than the photograph you see behind me. This was the only reason I wanted to go to the Okovango in 2018, which was our second journey, and that was wild dogs, because they are absolutely gorgeous. Anyway, Duncan, away you go. Thank you.
Right, well, thank you very much for that introduction, Malcolm. I'll just share my screen, bear with me. I think this is the first time I have actually done this. There we are. You seeing what I'm seeing?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, thank you to everybody for tuning in tonight for a journey into the Okovango Delta. I'm in agreement with Malcolm. Out with the bounds of Scotland, this is just my favourite place on the planet. And I'm quite sure just about everybody will know. Now, let me see why this is not moving on. All right, allow me just to stop sharing for a second and see if I can work around this. And from the beginning, do we have movement? Yes, there we go. And I'm sure we all know where the Okovango is, up in that northwestern corner of Botswana. And the waters that feed the delta originate in rainfall in the highlands of Angola. And they take several months to work their way down through the river systems and lakes before crossing a narrow strip of Namibia. Okay. And eventually entering into Botswana itself. That distinct fan shape spreading out across the Kalahari Depression.
Duncan, you need to share your screen.
Is it not sharing?
No, I'm afraid not. No, I'm sorry.
Ah, right. Bear with me. Let me escape from that. Come back.
If you share the one which is all the apps that you have up.
All right.
rather than a specific app. It should work better.
Right, I'm just going to stop that, and I'm not sure why this is not going. Bear with me for a moment. Do you have it now?
We've got your.
That's it.
Yeah, that's
You've
it.
got that. All right.
We've got your. Oh, what do you call it?
That's it.
Hopefully there's a hippo looking at you.
There
Yes,
is.
there is.
Right, and you now see the map?
That's
Yes, we do.
Yeah, we're off and running.
it. Hey.
All right.
Wonderful.
So yes, that's the location of the delta, and it is quite unusual in that the rainfall in Botswana, as you can see from this chart, the wet season starts to gather momentum round about October and gathers pace through December, January and February, and then tails off. And predictably and understandably, that is known as the wet season. And through May, June, July and August and into September, you have virtually no rainfall, and predictably that is called the dry season. However, the rainfall in Angola takes such a time to reach the delta that the peak flood doesn't actually arrive until the middle of the year in about June, July and August. It can vary year to year depending on the rainfall up in Angola. And the first trip that I took to the delta was in 2015, and that was in the April.
Older way.
Sorry? And that was at the end of the rainy season. So at that juncture, all the grass is long, it's green, and the trees are in full leaf. The second trip, which I was accompanied by Malcolm, took place in 2019, and that was in the September. And then the peak flood had started to recede. The grass, other than around the fringes of the lagoons, it's all brown, and many of the trees have shed their leaves. So always 600,000 hectares of permanent swamps, and predominantly that's up in the northwestern corner where the panhandle is, where all the deep water can be found. But as the floods come in, you get an extra 1.2 million hectares of flooded grasslands, and that is one of the main things that draws in the wildlife from all around and creates what is in effect probably the largest oasis on the planet. And in order to do that, the Okovango needs to supply 2.5 trillion gallons of water to feed the delta. So if you want to go there, you will find, supported by all that water, 89 different species of fish, and there are also 64 species of reptile. And I know with the PSNS we have an ornithological department, and if you go there you will be in birders' paradise with nearly 500 different species of birds, and I'll show you some of them later on. Some you will undoubtedly know, others maybe not. But you also have a botanist section, and if you go to the delta you'll find over 1,000 different plants growing there, supported by the waters of the Okovango River. But the main reason I go is for the 130 species of mammal, the largest of which is on the left hand side of your screen and needs no introduction whatsoever. This image was taken from a traditional Botswanan dugout canoe called a makoro, and I'll talk a little bit more about them further on. So a quick look at the delta courtesy of Google Earth, and you'll see down in the bottom here is Mown Airport. It's known as the gateway to the delta, and if you're considering going, you're more than likely to fly to Johannesburg in South Africa and transfer by a smaller aircraft up to Mown. From there, on both occasions, our camping safari took us up to the northeastern side of the delta, and you'll see there that there are two different campsites, and there's a reason for that. We camped on the banks of the River Kwai, and for those that might be curious, yes, there is a bridge over the River Kwai, and the reason that we started there is because it's out with the game reserves, and as such your guide is permitted to carry a firearm, and because of that you can go on bush with your guide there to protect you with a rifle should anything go awry. Inside the game reserve at the second camp, it's the Moremi Game Reserve, which takes up approximately 30 to 40% of the delta. Inside the game reserve, no weapons are permitted. So that's one of the differences. The other is that within the game reserve, you are not allowed out after sundown. You've got to be back in camp, so you can't move around in the hours of darkness. On the banks of the River Kwai, your guide can take you out at night on the search for nocturnal animals. To get up there from the airport, this black line here represents the tarmac road, and at that juncture it runs out and you're onto dirt tracks. And just to put that into context, that journey is roughly equivalent of going from Perth up to Inverness, but running out of tarmac at Ballinluig. And it takes about 4.5, 5 hours in the safari vehicle to get up to the first camp. Now this, you might guess, is not the Okovango Delta. This is a photograph from the, and as you can see, it's wide open spaces and the animals can be seen from a great distance. And a wonderful spectacle though it is, I much prefer the Delta, because there you never know what's coming. You can't see any great distance at all. And back to Google Earth, this is just a grab shot from Google Earth, probably about half a mile south of the camp on the River Kwai. And you can see there the huge variety of habitats. There's standing water, there's woodland, there's scrub, there's grassland, there's bare areas, and it's all interconnected by a maze of tracks, most of which have originally been created by the animals and utilised by the safari vehicles as well. So you never go any great distance without a change of habitat, which means you're going to see a bigger variety of animals, and you just do not know what's around the corner, it makes it that little bit more exciting. This is the sort of tent, if you think you might like to go on one of these safaris. It's very comfortable inside, a couple of camp beds, and to the rear there's a long drop toilet and a bush shower, which is basically a bucket on a tripod, and you get some heated water from the campfire. And really it's very comfortable indeed. This was one of Malcolm's images, and if you look at the ground round about the tent, it's quite bare, and this is typical of September time, and it's quite different if you go in the April. So it's not a designated specific campsite. The camp crew go out in advance, and they set the tents up for you, dig the long drop toilet. Also, one of the camp staff is a chef, and the food they produce out in the wilderness is absolutely superb. This is the type of vehicle that we did our safari trips in, the Toyota Land Cruiser. And you can see there from a photograph perspective, no obstructions on the side of the vehicle. The windscreen goes down at the front if the animals are ahead of you, and the seats are tiered so everybody gets an excellent view. I would draw your attention to the lady with the white hair. Just very quickly, she was a remarkable woman. She was 84 years of age. She went to the Okovango for the first time when she was 80, and this was her fourth consecutive visit. And when I asked her, was she looking forward to a rest when she got home, her reply was no. I'm off to India to photograph tigers. So age is absolutely no barrier to going to the Okovango, and it is to be recommended. So to the animals, and the most obvious one, it's the largest and the biggest attraction for eco-tourists. In Africa, there are approximately 460,000 elephants, and 130,000 of them can be found in the Okovango. They are essential to the health of the habitat and the ecosystem, but there are those that will tell you the elephants are causing more problems because of their numbers. And you could spend a whole evening just discussing the issues surrounding the elephants in the Okovango. But they consume masses of grass and foliage as they feed their way through the delta, and that opens up spaces for new plant growth. They distribute seeds in the dung, and when they go into the water, their sheer bulk opens up channels and diverts water into new areas, and in doing so their feet churn up the bottom, and the nutrients are stirred up and get carried off, as I say, into these new areas. They're not alone in that, of course. The buffalo and hippo are also instrumental, but in this paradise the elephants are often referred to as the gardeners of Eden. And if I show you this image, there's a few chacma baboons in the foreground there, but what I would like to point out is what is behind the elephants, and it's almost like a hedge. And this is the mapani trees, and the elephants browse on them, and they prune sort of just above elephant height. And as you go around the delta, this is a very common sight indeed. If you're fortunate to get up close and personal with an elephant, as I was, this lady came to investigate our vehicle, and the end of her tusk was approximately 14 inches away from my nose, through which I was not breathing at that juncture. My breath was well and truly held. But if you can get over the massive scale of the animal and actually look at the detail, the skin is quite phenomenal, and also the curvature on the side of our face. It tends to be the bulk that dominates, but the detail is really fascinating. This is some elephants that came down out of the bush to drink at the water, and you'll see the adult elephant there just skimming the top of the water with her trunk. And this is a technique that they developed because the cleanest water is at the surface, and they're quite clever at just skimming that off. The youngster, however, has yet to develop the skills and techniques required to use its trunk in such a fashion, and the only way for it to drink is to dip its head right into the water and drink directly through its mouth. So that is something that I think it will be quite glad when it can get the use of its trunk and no longer has to do that. But a preferred method of drinking for the calf is suckling from the mum, and this was photographed literally just a matter of yards away from where we were having our lunch. So it's a privilege to be able to dine in the presence of elephants. And Mother was quite unconcerned about us, did not perceive us as a threat in any way, and she carried on feeding while the youngster suckled. Going back to the April trip, this was a photograph taken late on in the day, literally just about 5 minutes before sunset, hence this lovely light shining through. And we found ourselves in a clearing with this herd, and the youngsters were in the centre of the herd, a protective measure by the adults, but we did get a glimpse of this sorry character. And this was quite tragic to see. At some point, we don't know how far back, the youngster had lost its trunk to one of probably 3 culprits. It would be either crocodile, hyena or lion. And some people might be surprised that hyenas would attack a baby elephant, and I'll maybe comment on that later on when we look at the hyenas. But either way, this one will be fine as long as it can suckle, but once it gets too big for that and requires more bulk and foliage for its feed, it's going to struggle big time without a trunk, and so its life expectancy sadly is very much shortened as a result. So we'll leave the elephants behind, and when it comes to behinds, they don't come much bigger than an elephant, and we'll move to the lion. And this fellow was roaring behind our camp, maybe about a quarter of a mile behind our camp at 4 o'clock in the morning. This was on my first trip, as you can tell by the green grass. This was the April. And as soon as we were up and about into the field, we tracked this chap down, and he was just getting prepared for a lengthy snooze through the heat of the day after being out on patrol around his territory. A comparison is this one, and you can see by the grass this where it's brown. This was a September encounter, and I refer back to that comparison with the Masai Mara. We almost missed this lion, who was lying right at the side of the track as we drove around the corner, and we stopped the vehicle immediately, and he was right beside us. So you can see, you can get up very close and personal with some of these animals. This lady, we were amazed when this happened. Our guide was driving along, and from a distance of about 70 meters, he spotted this lioness's ear twitching to get rid of the flies. And this is a lioness that's roughly the same colour as the grass. The guides are absolutely astonishing in their ability to spot things. So we went for a closer look, and that of course disturbed her a little bit more than the flies. And as we all do when we sort of wake up from a snooze, she rolled over and had a big old stretch. And there was some chatter going on the VHF radio between several of the guides, and the general consensus was that this lioness was coming into estrus and had moved away from the resident pride because three male lions, a coalition of three, who were invading the local territory with a view to a takeover. And the thought was that she was hopeful of possibly all three of the incoming males. So later on that night, because we were still out with the game reserve, we were able to go out at night, and we found one of these three invading males. The guides search with a handheld spotlight, which picks out the reflection in the eyes of the animals, and then they put a red filter on just to stop the animals from being dazzled. This fellow was absolutely hell-bent on where he was going, totally ignored us. He was marching purposefully, and about a quarter of a mile away his two colleagues were doing the same. And the local lionesses had decided they did not want to have anything to do with these three males, principally because they had cubs, and the males would kill the cubs given half a chance. So the females took off, and the following afternoon we caught up with the pride of females. This is one of them. At this juncture, they've covered through the heat of the day approximately 13 kilometres. This is at a time when they would normally be sleeping. So unusual behaviour for them, but they were incredibly nervous about the presence of these three males, and they were constantly looking over their shoulders. The whole pride were underneath these trees. One of them came down to the water's edge where we were parked for a drink, but even after refreshing herself with a drink, you can see here she is absolutely exhausted, almost too tired to walk back and get into the shade. Now, moving the story along, later that night we were back in our camp, and just at the darkening, the pride of lions arrived on the opposite bank of the River Kwai from where we were camped. And here's four of them here. And this image was taken, as I say, almost when it was dark, so I've lightened this up big time in Photoshop so you can see the lions. And they moved off further downstream, which is to the left as we look at it, and there, round about midnight, they encountered two buffalo, and they attacked one of the buffaloes. It was a bull, and they managed to kill it. However, whether it was because of the exhaustion of their day's escape from the three males, it took them over 15 minutes to kill that one buffalo. And throughout that quarter of an hour or so, he roared and he screamed, and the noise reverberated through the delta, attracting the attention of the resident hyenas. Now they turned up at the kill site, and they needed significant numbers if they were going to drive the lions off the kill. And so they started to howl and to holler to attract other hyenas, and they eventually had enough numbers to drive off a pride of, I'm not sure of the exact number, but there was between maybe 9 and 12 lions, and the hyenas drove the lions off the kill. They devoured the buffalo, and slipped back off into the bush with full bellies. The lions then returned to the kill, and it was there the next morning that we caught up with them. And I should point out at this juncture that despite all the noise and commotion that had gone on through the night, Malcolm and I slept soundly throughout and never heard a sound. But here's one of the cubs, and it's at the neck below, and you can see the lower mandible and teeth there on the left hand side, and the horn at the bottom there. And you can see from the neck not a lot has been left by the hyenas. Even when they were chewing on the bones, there was always at least one of the lionesses keeping an eye open, not for the hyenas coming back, but once again we suspect their nervousness was all about those 3 invading males. This was a snapshot from a piece of video footage, and you can see from the grass this is April time, and you can also see that it's not a campsite that's used all the time. This basically was set up at a random spot next to a river. And I want you to imagine that night has fallen, and I'm sat exactly where I am in that chair, and the chap I was sharing a tent with, a guy called Craig, was sat in the other one. Darkness has fallen, and I'm writing up my journal with my head torch to see what I'm doing, and Craig was reading using his head torch, and that was attracting insects. So I got undid the zip of the tent door, stepped inside and pulled the zip down again, and picked up my bag to get some insect repellent. And it was at that point I heard the first of the shouts, and at some of the other tents people were shouting, although I couldn't make out what. And then suddenly the zip flew up, and Craig burst into the tent pulling the zip down behind him, and there's a lion in the camp. There's a lion in the camp. So that immediately gets your attention, and I went to the right hand side of the tent as we look at it, where there is a window, and the window is made of the same green mesh material that you can see in the door. And I pressed my face up against the window so that my head torch would shine outside to see if I could see anything. And what I saw was this. Immediately outside the window I was looking out of, there was a male lion looking straight back in at me. Now, this is a mock-up image just for illustration purposes, but this is almost exactly what and if you ever want to count the hairs on the back of your neck, I can certainly recommend this situation as a good time to try and do it. It is a scary, scary thing. But the guides came running, shouting and flashing torches, and the lion moved off into the trees behind the campsite. There was in actual fact 2 of them, but only one came to visit my tent. So just another illustration. Once again, this is a mock-up, but it gives you an idea of where the lion was in relation to where we were sitting. And he undoubtedly was there when we were sat in those chairs, and we had absolutely no idea he was there. We were waiting for our supper, and quite conceivably we could have ended up being his. So life in the Delta can be quite exciting at times. But lions also cause problems, and predation on some of the farms around the periphery. It does happen, and it causes conflict between the wildlife and the subsistence farmers. But over the past 4 years, there has been a study looking at the effect of painting eye spots on the backside of cows. and it's quite an extraordinary thing to see. But this study, which has been carried out by the University of New South Wales and the Botswanan Predator Conservation Organisation, they looked at just over 2,000 cattle in 14 different herds, and they painted eye spots onto a third in each of the herds, cross marks onto another third, and left a third of the cattle unmarked. And over that 4-year period, 19 cows were predated in the study area, which might not seem a lot, but if you're a subsistence farmer and you lose one or maybe 2 or 3 of your cattle, that can be quite catastrophic. So only one of the 19 kills was carried out by a leopard. The other 18, it was the lions that were responsible. But the results were that not a single cow that had eye spots was predated upon, and with the cross marks, only 4. So 15 out of the 19 that were killed had no markings. And the logic behind it is that both leopard and lion are ambush predators. They need to get close to their prey to launch an attack. And if, for example, they're stalking an antelope and the antelope suddenly spots them, the predator knows the game is up and they abandon the hunt. So the theory is that eyes on the backside of cows fool the predator into thinking they've been rumbled and they give up. There were 4 with the cross marks. However, they're not sure what's going on there. They think it may well be the case that these are markings that are not normally seen in nature, and so they're a bit unusual, and if it's odd, then it's maybe better just to avoid it and go for what you know you can kill and head for an unmarked animal. So it's a cheap and very simple way of protecting livestock. Only time will tell if the predators work out that they're being conned, and I believe the study is continuing. So it's an interesting approach to minimising conflict between the wildlife and the farmers. The Mikoro, this is the traditional dugout canoe that's used for getting around the lagoons and the delta. Traditionally, they would be carved out of trunks from ebony trees, sausage trees, and a few others. But nowadays, in the interest of conservation, the Mikoros are made from fiberglass. They are propelled very much the same way as you would punting with a pole. Malcolm and I out on a Mikoro with our guide and a lady called Lorraine, who was one of our travelling companions, and it is just such a peaceful, quiet way to get around on the water, and you get close up to lots of wildlife who don't seem to be threatened by this mode of transport. So you can see birds like this one. This is the little bee-eater. Gorgeous little bird, not much bigger than a robin, and they'll perch on the reeds watching for obviously bees and other insects. This one, very common throughout the delta. This is the African openbill, and I don't have to explain why it gets that name. The shape of the bill is all about catching snails. That's its favourite food, and these snails frequent the lagoons and swamps of the delta. They're quite vocal birds when they're flying. If there's 2 or 3 of them flying along a river, they will be having a conversation as they go. So that's the African openbill stork. This one, a fish eater, this is the African darter. And you can see the webbed feet there, and the hooked bill used for chasing down fish in the waterways. A very common bird in the delta is the egret. You'll see these all over the place in the delta. Lovely birds on the hunt for frogs, fish, and whatever else it can find in the swamps. It's very common, but an egret that most certainly is not is this one. This is the slaty egret, named after the colour of its feathers, that slaty grey colour. And these are an endangered bird. There are estimated to be no more than 3,000 of them in Africa. And we were fortunate as we went around the delta. So that's one of the reasons why we need to look after the delta. It's home to some really endangered creatures. This one's not endangered. This is the African fish eagle, and it's quite a raucous bird. You often hear them calling. They're quite vocal. They fish very much the same way as you would see an osprey in Scotland fishing. They're expert at that. But they're not averse to feeding on carrion, frogs, lizards, and even snakes. They are not fussy eaters, the African fish eagle. This striking character is the yellow-billed stork. They feed by probing that huge yellow bill deep into the mud, and then effectively they do a tap dance with their feet, and any creatures that are disturbed by that motion, the beak is ready to snap shut and capture it. And in April, the waterways are festooned with water lilies, and they are absolutely gorgeous. I took this image from one of the Makoros when we were out on a trip on the water. But come September, all the blooms by and large have faded and passed on, and you'll be very lucky to see many water lilies at the end of the dry season. Back to the animals, here we have the impala, and I draw your attention to the black markings on its rump. Some would argue that it's very similar to the letter M, and even more so, it's reminiscent of a logo of a fast food outlet. And as most of the large carnivores like to eat impala, they are often referred to as the McDonald's of the bush. But I think they are absolutely stunning animals. They have got gorgeous features, really soft faces. Only the males have horns. They are called, the males are rams, females are ewes, and predictably the youngsters are called lambs. And you get them in herds ranging from about 15 to 20 all the way up to 50. And in this particular case, you have one male leading the way with, you can see him there with the horns, and he's leading his collection of females along the riverbank. I think there's about 30 in that particular herd. But you've got to keep your eyes open in the delta, and it wasn't until I got home and looked at this photograph that I spotted the giraffe lurking in the background. So I got no points for observation on that particular day. You can see here the impala are not close to the woods. That's where predators lurk and can spring ambushes, and of course the impala's favourite method of escape is speed and running, and they need open space in order to do that. So half the herd will have their heads down grazing, while the other half are on the lookout for any potential dangers. A similar antelope, this is the red lechwe. Although they're similar, they're quite different in many ways. these are aquatic antelope, and where the impala like to run for open space, the red lechwe, their preferred method of escape is to head for water. And that's illustrated in this next image, where we have one impala heading to the left to open space after we've suddenly turned up and startled them, but the lechwe instinctively run towards the water. So totally different behaviour from the two different species there. And another difference, I would draw your attention to the back of the impala. It's almost as flat as an ironing board, but if you compare that to the hindquarters of the red lechwe, they have these rather long back legs and a high rump at the rear. And the reason for that is their instinct is to head for water, and these powerful back legs and rump muscles help propel it through the water, and that is their way of escaping predators, and it's very effective indeed. Malcolm's favourite, the African wild dog, sometimes known as the painted wolf, sometimes as the Cape hunting dog, the wild hunting dog. It has a host of different names, but they are remarkable animals and are found in numbers in the Okovango Delta where they thrive. However, we came across this particular dog and three of its pack members. I go back to the Masai Mara comment. We came round the corner and this dog was in the middle of the road. So you just never know what you're going to see. And one of its fellow pack members here, they stood on the road for about maybe 3-4 minutes before disappearing off into the bush. So incredibly rare animals, and very fortunate to see them. In September, when I was there with Malcolm, and once again, if you see the grass, it's all brown on the long edges of the water. There was a group of 6 wild dogs hunting on the far side of this stretch of water. This were 3 of them, and unfortunately for us, one of them picked up on a scent and they took off at pace into the bush, and we were not able to follow to see what they were up to because of the depth of this water. Also in this photograph, up at the top, you'll see the base of a large termite mound. And it's an interesting fact that in the delta, every single island started life as a termite mound. The termites build up the way to avoid the floodwaters, and eventually earth develops round about, birds use them for perches, and their droppings encourage plant growth, and so on it goes until eventually, over a considerable period of time, you end up with an island. And every island in the delta started in exactly the same way. This is the alpha male and alpha female of the pack, and you can see here that they are highly attentive, on the lookout for any potential threat, but equally on the lookout for any potential food. They are just quite remarkable beasts. And the pups, they don't come much more adorable than that. And when you look at that, you think just what a wonderful animal. And it is therefore surprising what I'm going to show you next. I found this document dating back to 1916, and this was basically an application form for a reward of 5 shillings for killing a wild dog. And you had to supply the animal with the tail intact, and you would get your 5 shillings, which in today's money would equate to £44. And amazingly, that was in force all the way up to 1977. So that in part explains the next staggering fact. And back in the early 1900s, the African population of wild dogs was estimated to be about 500,000. Today in Africa, there are 1,400 adult dogs left, which is just an absolute tragedy. And yet another reason why the Okovango desperately needs all the protection that we can afford it. This bird, it's not one you're going to see in Scotland. This is a Cory bustard, and it is Africa's heaviest flying bird. Huge birds. They grow up to 4 feet in height and can weigh 40 pounds to get off the ground when they're that heavy. So that's the Cory bustard, but it does not compare to the next bird, which is obviously a heron, but this is the largest heron in the world. It's the Goliath heron, and it grows to a height of 5 feet, which incidentally is exactly the height of my darling wife. And it's rather strange to think that a bird can grow to that height. And of course I'm referring to the heron there. Back to the animals, the greater kudu. And this particular antelope, we've reached a size where the impalas were rams, ewes and lambs. Once you are as big as a kudu, you become a bull, a cow and a calf. And only the males have these spectacular horns, and they grow up to, they're measured along the length of the spiral, and the longest ones that have been recorded are about 1.8 meters in length. And standard adult male kudu will have 2.5 twists to its horns. However, there have been examples where there's been 3 and even rarer 3.5 twists. But sadly, most of them are to be found now on the walls of trophy hunters. In the April, this is a common thing you'll experience. Lots of the tracks are underwater, and there is no other way of getting around than going through them. And the vehicles are absolutely fine with this. However, this particular vehicle, driven by this particular man, a chap called Nkosi, was crossing a lagoon that he had crossed many times before, but since his last visit, the hippos had gouged out an underwater highway, and his wheels dropped right down into it, and he was firmly stuck there. So for the next sort of 40-45 minutes, our time was spent setting up tow lines to pull him out of the swamp, which was quite entertaining. For bird lovers, this is one of the favourites. This is the spectacular lilac-breasted roller. And these are not uncommon. You see them virtually every day in the Delta. This isn't enhanced in any way. This is exactly the colour of the birds. They really are quite spectacular. And they'll find a perch that they're comfortable with, and it will overlook a piece of bare ground, and they will watch for insects and then swoop down from their perch, returning back to it with the insect for a meal. So that's the, and even in flight they are spectacular. The underside of their wings is this rich royal blue and vivid bright turquoise. A much bigger bird, this is the Verreaux's eagle owl. This particular specimen not overly chuffed at the fact that we've parked underneath its tree, disturbing its daytime snooze. but a huge owl nonetheless, Verreaux's eagle owl. This is one you might not be overly familiar with. This is the coppery-tailed cowcal, and it has feathers which are not particularly waterproof, and in April you will find mornings like this where first thing there's usually a mist and a really heavy dew. All the grasses are saturated, and that includes the coppery cowtails and feathers. So what it does is it finds itself a perch and it spreads all its feathers out, and it will spend the first hour of the day in the sun drying off before going about its daily business. So that's the coppery-tailed cowcal. This splendid specimen is a Burchell starling with this amazing iridescent blue colour to its feathers. And the Burchell starling shares the name Burchell with many plant species, animal species, and Burchell was a botanist and an explorer. I'm quite sure some in the botanist section will know all about William Burchell. His father had a 9-acre botanic garden in London, which is where the young Burchell developed his interest in botany, and he was also a phenomenally good artist and illustrator, and he headed off to St Helena to collect specimens there before moving on down to South Africa, where he was exploring for somewhere in the region of 3 years. It's worthy of note that his wife was missing him, and she managed to convince the skipper of a ship to take her to St Helena so she could be with her husband. Two things happened. Her husband had gone by the time she got there, and by the time she got there, she'd fallen in love with the skipper of the ship and headed off with the skipper. So not a very happy ending of that marriage for Mr. Burchell. But that's the Burchell starling. If you are ever spotted by a buffalo, you will know all about it. They have got the most amazing stare. Herds in the Delta can number up into 4 figures quite easily. And the thing about buffaloes is you will smell them before you see them. Their personal hygiene leaves a little bit to be desired. But they have amazing stares, and they can also look very disdainfully at you, as this one is doing. And Malcolm and I were really fortunate. Our guide spotted a large herd of buffalo in woodland, and he said, "Let's go and look at the buffalo," and promptly drove in the opposite direction. And he parked up about half a mile away from this woodland, and the buffalo duly emerged. And they started coming out of the woodland in a column, and they just kept coming and coming. For about 20 minutes, this column of buffalo just kept emerging from the tree line and crossing this open space. And it's a tactic that they use to deter predation by lions. No matter which buffalo the lions would go for, there is an army coming up behind that will see the lion off. So it's a defensive mechanism that the buffalo employ. Here's our friend the hippo, responsible for killing more people in Africa than any other species. Another comparison with Masai Mara, we came round the corner and disturbed a female hippo that was just on the edge of a lagoon. She burst back into the water, and that upset the male, who came to threaten us. You can see the water flying everywhere. That's courtesy of his tail thrashing vigorously as he defecates. his warning sign to us that this is his territory and we are not welcome. However, he then went on to another threat display, scooping up water with his lower jaw, throwing his head back and almost gargling, and all the water would come cascading out, which was quite impressive to see. But we were obviously disturbing them, and that's not something we wanted to do, so we quietly backed away, having got our photographs. The giraffe that you'll find in the delta is the southern giraffe, and here it is underneath this particular tree where you'll see thread-like bits of string dangling down. They are part of what held onto a seed pod on the sausage tree, and it's quite obvious how the tree gets its name. The seed pods are adored by giraffe and elephant alike, and it's worthy of note that leopards love the sausage tree, but not at this stage. They like it when the tree is in flower and the petals start to fall to the ground, because it attracts impala who like to eat the fallen flowers. And as they fall in flowers, there's a strong possibility of a rapidly descending leopard from above. So that's the sausage tree. And you can see here just exactly the same as the impala. If in a group some are, in this case, drinking, the others have heads up looking for any potential threat. And we've already had an elephant without a trunk. Here we have a giraffe without a tail. And I suspect very much so that a lion was the culprit in this case. The common water buck, probably a little bit bigger than our red deer, certainly a bit more powerful. They're big animals. And here we have a female and the markings around the rear end, local legend would have it that the water buck were the first animals to board Noah's Ark when it was ready. And unfortunately they went to the toilet before the paint had dried on the toilet seat, and since then they've worn that mark as a reminder of that day. I'm not sure just exactly how that stands up to scientific scrutiny, but a nice story nonetheless. Two more animals to go. This is my favourite, the spotted hyena. They get a bad press. They are considered scavengers and rather brutish and ugly, but they are amazing animals in so many respects. I'm not going to, but I could talk about them the entire night. So this particular animal I encountered on the first time I was there, and it decided to walk past our vehicle, and I was able to take this photograph. I could quite easily have put my hand out the side of the vehicle and patted the hyena on the head. I'm not entirely sure I would have got my hand back, but it was that close. And if you look at the reflection in its eye, you can actually make out where the vehicle is in relation to it. So amazing animals. And on our second trip with Malcolm, we encountered this group of hyenas who are resting up after a rather large breakfast. Early in the morning, just before dawn, they had killed an animal, the remnants of which are over on the left here, and unfortunately it was a baby elephant. And you can see here one of the hyenas making off with a leg for itself. The elephant, you can tell by the size of the foot there, was a very, very young one indeed. Here's another one trying to separate a leg for itself, and it's a very structured hierarchy that the clan have, and those at the bottom of that hierarchy are the ones that are left with the scraps. So even though most of the elephant has been consumed, you have these ones scrapping over the scraps. But always on the alert in case any lions should be attracted by the noise of the kill. So that's my favourite animal, the spotted hyena. And finally, we come to the leopard. Malcolm and I were lucky to see this leopard over the course of 3 days. She had killed a male impala. She also had a cub, and we saw her each morning because she was with the kill approximately a third of a mile away from the camp. So each day as we went out, we saw her, and each night as we came back, she was still there feeding on the impala with her cub. But on my first trip, very similar to the encounter with the hyena, I referred back once again to the Masa Mara, where you can see everything. We came around a corner and there was a leopard right in the middle of the track, and she walked past the side of the vehicle, and as I leant out to take her photograph, she stared straight down the barrel of the lens and snarled. Yet another moment for counting the hairs on the back of your neck. It is just one of those things that you do not forget. That's firmly in my memory, that moment. And I'm going to finish up with this bit about leopards with a little video clip. It's only about 30-40 seconds, but this is the mother leopard coming down out of the tree. The sun has just come up, and she is greeted at the base of the trunk by her cub. And as we all like to have a stretch in the morning, she's not going to be permitted to have one. The cub wants to play. So we can call it a halt at that juncture, and we can talk about any of the issues surrounding the Okovango after you've had a break.
Oh, pity. Oh, that's a shame. Might be on the other page. No, I think. All right.
Speak to Duncan. He's muted.
Oh,
Yeah.
can anyone hear me?
I can hear you,
We
Duncan.
can hear you now. Yeah.
All right. Did you lose visual?
We
Yes,
did.
it froze and
yeah.
the music was breaking up.
Yeah.
All right.
Such a shame.
Yeah.
Well, call it a halt at that juncture then, and after you've had a break, you can we can have a chat about any of the issues affecting the Delta.
Yeah. We missed the ending, Dunk. We missed the ending where I think you were going to talk about the concessions.
in the northeast or northwest rather.
Well, can we do that after people have had
Yeah.
a break, and I'll try and sort out whatever's going on with my broadband here.
Yeah, I know. It's such a shame because I was just saying to Fiona, you're in for a treat because there's